Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. When you hear about a nation's defense budget hitting nearly $1 trillion, what immediately comes to mind? Do you picture, I don't know, an unshakable fortress, an overwhelming military machine? Or do you wonder, like we do, what such an astronomical sum actually gets you? The Economist recently published an article exploring the United States FY 2026 defense budget. It's slated to reach a record-breaking $961 billion. Now, on the surface, that sounds like, well, an unprecedented investment in national security. But the article itself hints at this paradox: a lot, but not enough. Well, so today we're going to scrutinize that headline figure, try to understand the underlying currents and complexities here.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how the composition of that colossal number, not just its sheer size, tells a much more nuanced story. It's about military readiness, future capabilities. It's easy to get lost in the big sticker price. But the real insights, they come when you dissect where those dollars are actually coming from and, crucially, what their true impact is.
That's a critical starting point. So let's dive into that headline figure, $961 billion for 2026. The Economist article notes it falls short of the president's trillion-dollar boast, but still, it's a record. And they describe it as a hodgepodge of two bills. There's the regular base defense budget, and then funding from what the article colorfully terms the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or BBB.
Right, and this is exactly where we need to unpack things, because that distinction, it's crucial. The Economist identifies the two parts, sure. But looking a bit deeper, there's a critical difference that really shifts how we should see this budget. The Pentagon's base request for FY 2026 is actually $848.3 billion.
Yeah.
And what's really significant about that number is that it's flat compared to last year.
Correct.
Flat. And when you factor in inflation, a flat budget is, in real terms, a cut.
Hold on. So for a listener who just sees $961 billion and thinks massive spending increase, how do we square that with the idea that the core budget, the reliable part, is effectively shrinking? What's the implication there?
Well, the implication is that the headline number can be a bit of a smokescreen. What looks like this huge investment on paper is underneath a shrinking pool for the essential recurring costs, military readiness, that extra $113.3 billion, the bit that pushes the total up near $1 trillion, that comes from this one-time reconciliation BBB injection. And reconciliation funds, well, they're inherently one-off.
Okay, one-off, meaning not dependable year after year.
Exactly. By their very nature, you can't reliably fund recurring things like operational readiness, maintenance programs, the lifeblood, really, training, spare parts, upkeep. So even with this record total number, that flat base budget feels incredibly tight when it comes to the long-term stuff, the sustainment. It's sort of like getting a huge one-time bonus at work.
Right.
But finding your regular monthly paycheck hasn't budged. You can buy something flashy now, but paying the regular bills might still be a struggle down the line.
That is a vital distinction. So it's not just the size of the check, it's how the money is structured. The mix of reliable ongoing funding versus these one-off injections. That's really key to understanding the impact. Sounds like the headline fetish might be, well, quite misleading about the actual financial flexibility the military has.
It absolutely can be. It paints a picture that's simultaneously robust and fragile. You have these enormous sums flowing in, yes, but a big chunk of it is more like a sugar rush, not sustainable foundational nourishment.
That idea of robust and fragile, that's really insightful. It makes you wonder how these underlying tensions then play out when we look at specific defense programs. The Economist tried to map this. They categorized programs into strengthened, stalled, or slashed. They gave examples like more spending on the Golden Dome missile defense, cuts to F-35 fighter buys, and canceling the E-7 Wedgetail command and control aircraft. But as you've hinted, the reality seems more nuanced than those neat boxes suggest.
Oh, far more. It's a useful framework for the article, definitely. But when you dig a bit, our sources offer a critical lens that challenges each category. It reveals a much more complex picture. Let's take strengthened. The article mentions $25 billion for Golden Dome, framing it as an Iron Dome for America. Now, money's moving into missile defense, no doubt. But the challenge, costs are exploding. And a lot of the concept pushes into really unproven technology, things like space interceptors, high-energy lasers.
Jeff, it sounds like science fiction almost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And independent analyses suggest the plausible costs are way above those headline figures, potentially hundreds of billions just for a space layer, which creates this significant crowd-out risk, meaning it could suck money away from other vital defense priorities. So it's not just a straightforward boost for something existing. It's a massive bet on something still highly speculative.
So less about buying more trucks, more like funding a moonshot, a huge bet on future tech, maybe at the expense of current needs. That sounds like a significant strategic gamble.
It is. And then another area they list as strengthened is shipbuilding and munitions. $40 billion for stockpiles, $29 billion for 16 new warships. The article notes DDG-51 destroyers, Virginia-class subs. All sounds good. However, there's this crucial point that often gets missed. What's authorized in a budget versus what's actually buildable by industry. They're often very different things.
The reality check.
Exactly. Industrial-based capacity, shipyards, maintenance depots, and critically skilled labor that remains a hard limiter. Take 155-millimeter artillery shells, for example. Very important right now. U.S. output is only projected to hit 100,000 rounds per month by mid-2026. That's lagging behind previous targets. So just throwing cash at it doesn't automatically mean you get more stuff out the door faster.
That's such a powerful point. Money alone doesn't solve it. You can write the check for a new submarine, but if the shipyard's full or you don't have the specialized welders or the components aren't ready, the money doesn't immediately translate into more ships or more shells. Is there a view that eventually enough money will fix these industrial-based issues, even if it takes a while?
Well, yes, with sustained, consistent investment, you can rebuild capacity, absolutely. But it's a multi-year process, often multi-decade. It takes time. The issue right now is the mismatch between the perceived immediacy of the need and the actual reality of industrial throughput. Think of it like, I don't know, trying to bake a really complex cake. You can have all the money for the best ingredients. But if your oven only fits one pan, or your expert bakers are already working flat out, you're still limited in how fast you can produce cakes. The current spending is hitting those kinds of structural limits.
Makes sense.
Now, for the stalled category, the article mentions F-35 buys being cut 47 next year, down from a planned 74. But looking closer, this isn't really an abandonment of the F-35. It looks more like a portfolio trade. They're shifting focus resources towards developing the F-47, that's the next-gen, sixth-generation fighter concept, and also towards a broader strategy for cheaper mass, maybe drones or other platforms.
So less a cut, more a strategic pivot.
Kind of. And crucially, this isn't even settled yet. Congressional drafts from the Senate and the House actually diverge on this. Some are pushing to add F-35s back into the budget. It shows this is far from a done deal.
Okay, so what looks like a cut from the Pentagon might actually be a strategic shift, and it's still being fought over on Capitol Hill. That's way more complicated than just stalled.
Absolutely. And then they're slashed. The article presents the E-7 Wedgetail cancellation, that's an airborne command and control plane, as a fait accompli. A pivot to space-based sensors, which it notes are mostly untested. Yet our background material explicitly states this cut isn't fait accompli at all. Congress, in both chambers, is actively pushing to restore the E-7 funding.
The classic Pentagon Hill tug-of-war.
Precisely. It illustrates that dynamic perfectly. What the Pentagon proposes isn't always what Congress disposes. There's a real back and forth that the article perhaps underplays a bit.
That tug-of-war really brings the complexities to life, and that's where it gets, frankly, fascinating. So a seemingly clear decision from the Pentagon isn't the final word. Congress weighs in, and even if the money is there, the industrial capacity might be the real bottleneck. It just shows the layers beneath that big budget number.
It really does. It's a constant dance. Policy goals, technology dreams, and the hard practical limits of industry.
So we've talked about the budget's makeup, the program complexities. Let's unpack the why behind the economist's diagnosis. Record cash, lingering scarcity. It sounds like they're saying $961 billion isn't enough, but you're suggesting it's about more than just the dollar amount.
That's right. The diagnosis itself, record cash, lingering scarcity, it's fair. But the reason why isn't simply that $961 billion is somehow too small in absolute terms. A huge factor, as we've touched on, is that industrial-based throughput. It's not just having the money. It's the physical ability to actually produce and maintain the equipment, the shipyards, the depots, having enough skilled workers. Even with funds pouring in, output can lag. Cash doesn't, magically create capacity overnight.
That's a critical constraint. It takes time to build a new factory, train welders, get supply chains going. What else is driving this scarcity feeling?
Another key thing is how those one-off funds distort the picture. The BBB, the reconciliation dollars, they're substantial, yes. They juice procurement in the near term. Great for buying shiny new hardware or starting big construction projects. But crucially, they're unreliable for the multi-year operations and maintenance accounts, the O&M. That's what ensures readiness day to day. So this creates a paradox. The headline budget is huge, but the ongoing programs, the daily readiness efforts, they feel squeezed because their reliable base funding is flat.
So the military might look rich on paper with these big injections, but the actual funds for just keeping everything running smoothly year after year, those are struggling. That sounds like a recipe for a very stressed system, actually.
It's the core tension, really. And then there's the readiness reality check tied to Washington politics. You often get what's called a continuing resolution, or CR. It's basically a temporary budget patch. Spending gets frozen at last year's levels, sometimes for months.
Which must make planning incredibly difficult.
Hugely. Imagine running your household, but for months you only get last year's allowance. Hard to plan for new expenses or big projects, right? So when you combine a likely prolonged CR, which often happens with that flat base funding, it can significantly delay new starts for programs. It dampens crucial training, which means despite that trillion-ish headline figure, critical things like flying hours for pilots, essential maintenance work at depots, shipyard modifications, they can still get squeezed. It's a paradox the article hints at, but maybe doesn't hammer home quite as hard as it could.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what does it mean? If money isn't the only answer, what really drives the effectiveness of all this spending? It sounds like this complex interplay of, well, politics, industrial capacity, and the very structure of the budget itself. It's about more than just the dollar amount, isn't it? It's how the dollars are shaped, distributed, and ultimately whether the system can actually absorb and use them efficiently.
It absolutely is. It's like three-dimensional chess. Not just adding up numbers. You can see why generals might be tearing their hair out over these political battles, even with all that cash floating around.
Given all these complexities, these ongoing tensions, what should we, the listeners, be watching for? What specific signals will really tell us how these dynamics are playing out, how this budget actually translates into reality?
Okay, yeah, good question. To really gauge things, here are some concrete signals to watch. First, keep an eye on the Golden Dome contracting scope, specifically the Missile Defense Agency's SHIELD program. It's the big project for this Iron Dome for America. Hey, if that program starts awarding multi-vendor task orders at a large scale, well, expect a durable budget gravity towards homeland missile defense. That could potentially pull significant resources away from traditional force projection accounts, ships, planes overseas, etc. It signals a real strategic shift.
Okay, so if they really start building out that big shield, it'll inevitably pull money from other areas. Makes sense. What else?
Second, watch the E7 outcome in Congress. We talked about the wedge tail. Whether that program is ultimately restored by Congress against the Pentagon's initial proposal, that will be a crucial test. It'll check that space sensors only strategy and tell us about the perceived resilience, or lack thereof, of traditional air command and control before the next-gen space stuff is fully ready. It's a real indicator of that Pentagon Hill dynamic.
Right. A check on whether they're willing to bet entirely on the future yet. And the fighter jets, the F-35 versus F-47.
Yes, the F-35 versus F-47 split. Look at the final appropriations numbers when they come out. That will reveal a lot about the strategic direction. Will the U.S. prioritize more near-term mass, buying more F-35s now to bolster the current fleet? Or will it choose to accelerate the next-gen F-47 development, even with all the inherent schedule and technological risks involved in pushing cutting-edge systems? The final numbers show where the emphasis truly lies and maybe what kind of risks they're willing to accept.
That's a clear indicator. Are they focused on today's readiness or gambling more on accelerating tomorrow's capabilities?
Exactly. And finally, just watch the continuing resolution duration. How long does it take Congress to actually pass a proper budget? A prolonged CR, one that stretches deep into the winter? That would be strong confirmation that the military's challenges are maybe less about the amount of resources and more about a governance problem, a process problem within Washington itself. It highlights how the inability to simply pass a budget on time can be just as damaging, maybe more so, than the top-line dollar figure itself.
These aren't just, obscure legislative fights buried in committees. They're tangible indicators of real strategic shifts, of the real-world impact, how this massive budget actually translates or fails to translate into capability. They really invite you, the listener, to look beyond the headlines and engage with the details. So the Economist article, it offers a valuable glimpse into the sheer enormity of the U.S. defense budget, But by looking just a little deeper, as we've tried to do, we see its true impact isn't just about the dollar amount. That diagnosis, record cash, lingering scarcity, it feels fair. But the why is definitely far more complex. It's about the composition of the funding, that mix of reliable base money and those one-off windfalls. It's about the persistent industrial capacity bottlenecks. And it's about that constant political tug-of-war between the Hill and the Pentagon. All these factors make it uniquely challenging to just translate huge sums of money into immediate readiness and tangible combat power. And this dynamic, it leaves us with a kind of provocative thought, doesn't it? In an era of seemingly unprecedented spending, is it possible that efficiency, strategic vision, and maybe just plain industrial capability are now actually more critical than the sheer volume of dollars being poured into defense? Something to think about. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.